is that we would love to hear from you throughout today's session. We have an hour together and we have a really terrific panel lined up, and I think they're eager to hear the questions that are on your minds. So when we get into the panel conversation, please feel free to make use of the chat to share the questions that are on your mind. And please don't be shy if I call on you to just share your thoughts and speak with us directly. I think we've got a nice sized audience here. We can just be sort of informal and speak with each other. So we may do that. And then also, if you'd prefer not to speak, you can just let me know that and I'll make sure to read your question to the panel instead. So hopefully you can see my screen and everything. Is that showing up? Yep. Okay, great. Fantastic. So I wanted to share with you some of the research that we've been doing at Diligent Institute recently on this topic of how skill sets for new director hires are changing. We have seen some changes happening. And so we published this report a little bit earlier this year. I think it was probably around June or July, called Beyond the C-Suite, Trends in Director Skill Sets. And I'd strongly encourage you to download the whole report. I'm not going to go through every single finding in the report, but I want to just share a few highlights to give us some things to talk about during this panel conversation. And you can find the report at diligentinstitute.com. My colleague Kira just posted that link in the chat. So by all means, feel free to go and download this and peruse it at your leisure. One of the things we were interested to understand is what's the profile of new director hires mostly for public companies. And we wanted to sort of see how things were changing. And we took an assumption, which is that in the past, most directors were coming on boards having had either current or previous CEO, CFO, or COO expertise. So we kind of took that as our baseline, making that assumption that that is really the kind of the standard or the gold standard of what you're looking for in someone's skill sets when you want them to become a member of your board. But what's interesting is if you look at the numbers here on this chart, it's actually in decline. And while still it's the majority of new board members that have these traditional skill sets, it is declining. And it's not declining evenly around the world. We looked at 3 data samples, the US, the United Kingdom, and Australia. And you can see a pretty marked difference in Australia. That is really happening in large part because of some new requirements that have gone into effect in Australia since 2019 as part of the Royal Commission findings around board diversity. So you can see some board diversity efforts having an impact there also in terms of skill sets in the boardroom. But it's also changing in the US. And to go a little bit deeper to show you what this looks like, this is where you can see new director hires that have non-traditional experience. So non-traditional experience would be everything but CEO, CFO, and COO expertise. And you can see how that is growing. When we look specifically at the kinds of skill sets that we're seeing by gender, the information gets even more interesting. What we learned was that the vast majority of new director hires in select skill set areas are women. In particular, we looked at people who are coming onto boards with ESG expertise, technology, marketing, sales, legal, and HR. And across the board, we were seeing that the vast majority of these new director hires are in fact women. So maybe not super surprising as boards are looking to diversify their membership. They're not just looking for one variable that they can fill in. They're looking for people that bring specific skill sets. And in this case, they were finding a lot of female candidates that bring these skill sets. This was overwhelmingly true on the ESG and HR front. So we're seeing really the vast majority of new director hires that bring those skill sets onto boards are women. So it's kind of an interesting picture here. We're seeing, some of these trends changing. And again, it's not even around the world, but we expect to see this to continue. We're seeing more and more boards looking for people that have different skill sets. And they're also looking for directors that fill in a number of different kinds of diversity, including gender, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ status, age, other variables, nationality, and so on. And skill set is a very important component of that. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of some of the things that we saw in that recent report. The other report that I would turn your attention to is one called Gender Diversity and Leadership on Corporate Boards. We do that report every March. And this year was our second report. And what we looked at was not just how many women serve on corporate boards, but what is happening once those women join boards? What committees do they serve on, and so on? So I would take a look at both of those reports to get a sense for how these things are shaping up and how they're changing. I want to now invite the panel to join me. And let me introduce our panelists to you. And then I'm not going to do justice to their full bios, but I'm going to just introduce who they are. And hopefully they'll be able to share a bit more about their backgrounds with you. But joining me today, we have Lisa Blaze, who's the U.S. Board Practice Leader for Egon Zehnder. And she's also a board member of the global firm. I'm also pleased to have with us Tamala Oates-Forney, who's the Chief People Officer for Waste Management, and she's on the board of Summit Materials. And I'm also delighted to have my colleague Lisa Edwards, who is our President and COO for Diligent Corporation, and she is also on the board of Colgate-Palmolive. Thank you so much for joining me on this panel.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So just to kind of cue us up here, I think, the last 18 months have really brought about a sea change of priorities for businesses. And, companies are all trying to adapt to better serve their stakeholders. Boards are trying to grapple with new topics like ESG, climate change, sustainability. We have so many workforce challenges, particularly the talent crunch that we're in, new DEI policies and new requirements around that. There's just a lot of new priorities and challenges happening for boards. And so, I think boards are looking for new skill sets. I'd like to start actually with Lisa Blaze. And, you're coming from the search world. And so I'd love to have you talk a little bit about what you've been seeing on the search firm side and whether or not the findings in our report resonate with you.
Sure. Thank you, Dottie. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. Absolutely. I mean, this is something we've been seeing just not over the past 18 months, but probably over the last, I would say, 5 years. There had been a focus on gender diversity prior to the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. But in the past 18 months, it's been much more focused on racial and ethnic diversity. So absolutely would support what you're seeing, or Dottie, what your analysis has shown. Other things, what I would say though is that board turnover remains slow, because many boards don't have term limits. Sorry, just have age limits. Although we just learned for the 2021 proxy season, there were I think 456 new directors added to the S&P 500, up from 413 the year before. And so we are seeing boards increasing their board size, mainly to accommodate diversity or to focus more on diversity. So that's important. And then out of those 456, 47% were from a racial and ethnic minority, up from 22% the year before. So great progress there. And I think as your report said, Dottie, that we're seeing a focus beyond just the usual suspects, the CEO, CFO, Big Four accounting, retired audit partners, much more interest and openness to add functional heads as well as division presidents. We've seen specifically more interest in CHROs, as Tamla is evidence of, in terms of, because they bring a lot of the DEI focus, the future of work, given the pandemic, employee health, all of the social, the S part of ESG, executive comp, I could go on and on, succession planning. So we've been pushing this for years and it's getting some traction. So that's exciting. And then technology, anybody who's kind of a digital native can bring technology, their digital transformation experience, Silicon Valley types that are brought onto non-Silicon Valley boards. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing, and just a general openness to first-time directors, right? 2020 out of the proxy season, it was there were 28% directors in the S&P 500, new ones that were first-time board directors, and now it's up to 35% in 2021, right? So we're seeing this openness or willingness to have first-time board directors. So it's exciting for people in our female head of the board practice. This is something that we're passionate about. Over 75% of our board placements this year, actually, when we finish 2021, it'll be higher, but have been either women or people of color or ethnic or racial minority groups. So it's great for us, great for women in general, and of course, I truly believe great for boards at the end of the day. So I'll stop there.
That's terrific. Thank you. And so, Tamla, I want to come over to you because you represent someone who is probably in this report in some way, because you come from the HR world. And I understand that you also were recently placed on a board by Egon Gender. And so I wonder if you could share a little bit about your experience and, kind of what role you're playing there at Summit Materials as a, coming with an HR background.
So a couple of things I would say. I don't know what they did without the HR people on the board. I really, really don't. Like everything that we're working on, how did they make it without us? And then I would also like to say, I call myself this trifecta because I'm female, I'm Black, and I'm in HR. And so I kind of check a lot of boxes, if you will. And to your point, I just became a member of Summit Materials as a board member in May. And immediately I thought I was going to have, time to go through orientation and to spend some time learning. But because the issues from a talent, labor, leadership issues, they're so acute right now, I had to immediately jump in to add value. And I'm still sitting in an operating role. So sitting in an operating role, experiencing the challenges firsthand as a chief people officer of waste management, and then going to, Summit Materials and switching my hat as an advisor, going from an operator to an advisor, that's hard. It really is hard because I'm so used to doing. And so I'm learning a new skill, and that it is to advise. And the company Summit, albeit smaller than waste management, it's going through major transformation where the human capital strategy, the leadership strategy is critical to the company's short-term and long-term success. So they're really interested in my point of view. Summit Materials grew a lot via tuck-in acquisition, so a lot of small acquisitions, and that's very similar to waste management. So I do have a lot of firsthand experience to help them, and so it's been an amazing transformation. I feel like I'm really valued, and I'm adding value immediately. I was also very strategic about the board that I selected because, to Lisa's point, there is a lot of interest in my profile, and I had a lot of options. But because this was my first board, I really wanted to get one that was much smaller. So it's a small company, probably 2.5 billion in revenue, 6,000 employees. I have 50,000 in my day job. It's a little under the radar, but what I'm learning is going to be so advantageous both now and in the future in terms of the skills that I'm learning. And so it was a great process. Egon Zender was a great partner in helping me get placed. But the problem was me narrowing down the options and making sure that I chose the right board for where I was at this point in my life and where I was in terms of my professional experience and capacity to really offer insights.
That's great. Well, and Tamla, congratulations for being in the enviable position of having so many options. You had to figure out which one to choose. I know that's not always necessarily the storyline for a lot of women seeking
That's
board seats. So
harder. That's harder.
Great.
That's
It
hard.
can be,
Isn't it, Lisa?
for
It's
sure.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Lisa Edwards, I want to turn to you because you also are represented in this report because you come from, being a technology leader and working at different technology firms, and you're on the board of a consumer products company. And so I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about that experience. What was the process like finding the right organization to join the board of?
Sure. I think the first thing was I was also an operator. I also continue to have a day job, as you know. And I do think it's important to really take a hard look in the mirror and say, do I have the bandwidth to do this? I felt like I did. I had a great personal situation where my husband opted to stay home with our kid, and that sort of freed me up, and I felt like this was the right time. My argument to the at the time Salesforce was, listen, I think this will make me a better executive. In hindsight, it absolutely 100% has. So I feel really, really good about that. I do not think that the time commitment that I spend away from my day job takes a single thing away from that day job. I think it is additive in a huge way with the strategic lens, with the broadening, to different industries, to a different network, to seeing the high level strategic issues going on in the boardroom. So, I think, but you do need to have that conversation with your internal leadership if you're still working at a job, and you do need to have that conversation with your yourself, essentially, to say like, is now the right time? I want to crush my day job. That's important. The boards will be out there. They're never going away. And I always tell people, if you think you're going to retire, try to get that first board as you're walking out the door, not after you walk out the door, because the, sort of the half-life on relevancy starts to drop immediately. The other sort of weird and interesting thing about it is, and I'm sure if any of you on the phone have started thinking about the search, and Lisa probably knows. By the way, Lisa, you and I were probably born within 2 years on either side of each other, because every woman between 1965 and 1970 is named Lisa, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a high lack of imagination with our parents.
Yes, exactly.
It's so interesting. And I think it's why I'm so passionate about doing things like this and connecting women to other women. And it's why I feel so passionately about, one of the women who kind of informally mentors me, she said to me once, you have two arms, one is to pull yourself forward and the other is to reach back and pull people up with you. And I really believe that, because the very first question that I would get when I was looking for a board was, who do you know on the board? And I would say, I don't know anyone on the board. That's why we're here. And so, there's this chicken and egg bit where you have to get out of your comfort zone and you have to network a bit, but then it's also, then you have to think about what's important to you. So I actually had a list that I actually wrote down. And when I got the Colgate call, it ticked off every single thing on my list. And I'd started to get myself in the mix. I'd started to, sort of treat it like dating, like literally every person I spoke to, if a recruiter called me and said, hey, I want to recruit you to go work at this company, I would say, I'm not interested in that, but here's what I am interested in. And I would make sure that I sort of shared that when I was talking to other executives. This is a career ambition of mine. I would like to be on a public board someday. So I think there was just sort of that awareness building. But then I said, look, I want something out of the technology industry, because I think my particular expertise in digital transformation, the pixie dust of hypergrowth of Salesforce, is going to be more valuable to a company outside of the technology industry than in it. I had to be within a 6-hour flight of San Francisco, including any transfers, because I said, I just, again, got a kid, got a day job, got a lot going on, don't have time to be like spending 2 days in transit. I wanted a multinational company with a strong international presence, because I've worked internationally before, and Salesforce was always struggling to get to 50% revenue from international. So there's a series of things like that. So I knew it when I saw it. And I said, like, I am going to go for this. And I went for it hard. I did my research. I listened to analyst reports or to like analyst day. I read the financials. I, talked to people. I went to Safeway to look for, product placement. I did it all. And I really went for it hard. But I do think having, knowing yourself, knowing what your superpower is, being able to articulate that, being willing to get out of your comfort zone. I am a closet introvert. I do not like walking into a room of people. I do not like meeting people I don't know. Like, there's absolutely no worse torture for me than walking into a cocktail party. I did it all the time when I was looking for my first board. And, so it's sort of like you need to get the air cover of your executive team. And if you are a sitting executive and you have this conversation with your CEO and they say, yes, I'm supportive. I just bought the argument that you gave me that this is great for your, for my company, as well as for you as an individual, then the next thing you say is, great. Will you be my sponsor? Because CEOs get asked all the time. And like, believe me, you sloppy seconds from a CEO is great. Get the first board, right? So it's sort of like, okay, tell me what, then help be my sponsor. If something comes up that's interesting and you don't have the bandwidth to take it, like, I would love to be in consideration.
That's amazing. Tamla, I'm wondering if I could ask you to kind of elaborate a bit more on your story too, because I think it's just so great to hear the specific stories. I know in your case, you had sort of lots of people asking you, but how did you sort of position your capabilities and backgrounds as assets?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit different from Lisa, I would tell you. And again, I had been in this role for 2.5 years. And so I wanted, to Lisa's point, very similar. I wanted to make sure that I had my day job together before I even considered doing other things. And so, because I only get the opportunity to be on one public board in my current job. And so I wanted to make the best decision in that regard. So that was first, making sure that things were settled in my current job. I had my team in place, the strategy and all those things. So it's not that it was on autopilot, but I would have the capacity to do other things. So that was one. Secondly, in looking at the opportunity, I wanted a smaller board. Coming from a big company like GE, working in a big company like Waste Management, I wanted something smaller so that I could really have influence and impact in, I guess, in a more expedited way, right? So I looked for smaller. My boss was telling me, you should go for a Fortune 100, Fortune 200. I'm like, I'm looking for the right opportunity. And I looked for three things. I looked for, what am I going to learn? Am I going to be able to learn from the folks that are on the board? Is it the right size? On our board, there are 9 of us. And so it's a really good mix. And at the time, I didn't know anybody on the board, but as fate would have it, one of the board members on their board came from GE. And I was 20 years with GE. So there's a natural affinity. She's my mentor on the board, but we both worked at GE, didn't know each other at the time. So I wanted, am I going to learn anything? And the size was really good. Secondly, I looked for, am I going to be able to leverage my background and skill set in this company? So looking at leverage, how do I leverage what I know today and what I've learned over these 25 years of working in this role so that I can add immediate impact, right? And I was looking for that. And then lastly, but probably as equally as important, am I going to like the people that I'm going to be on the board with? Board dynamics is tricky, really, really tricky. And it could make or break your first board experience. So I spent a lot of time getting to know this group. It was a bit tricky because a lot of the time spent was very virtual, but the CEO, who was new to the company, by the way, I'll tell you about that story. She came to Houston and we met and we spent hours together, like talking about her vision. And this was a founder-led company and the founder had just been transitioned. And so they brought in, one, a female that was of interest to me. And secondly, someone that was not from the industry to move this company forward. And by picking someone like the CEO, I knew that the company was serious about transformation, as evidenced by the CEO that they picked. So I spent a lot of time with the CEO, even probably just as much with the CEO as I did with the board chairman, really understanding the process that they went through to change out the CEO and how the board dynamics worked in that regard, because it was a very contentious transition. And then secondly, I spent time with her understanding her assimilation and how she felt about the transition and where she wanted to take the company. And so after I met the two of them, I began to meet the other board members and have intimate conversations with them. And what I told them is that I am not interested, and I've never been a wallflower. I'm not interested in being your token on the board. I want to be able to add impact, and I want to have influence, and I want to be heard, and I want to add value. And I talked to them a lot about what my aspirations were as well, in being on the board. And I met all of them individually and then collectively. We did a lot of this via virtual. They really courted me and made me feel valued, really. And I just got a good feel, because I'm an HR person, I do assessments for a living. I really had a good feel for where they were going, what the growth trajectory would look like, and my role in helping them get there. And I could really, really learn a lot in this role that I could leverage for future board opportunities. And this is probably really unique. So my CEO was probably overly engaged in my appointment. He wanted to talk to the chairman of the board. I wanted to make sure that this is the right opportunity for you. That's not typical. But the chairman, he said, okay, because they really wanted me on this board, and said, I will talk to Jim. So Jim's, I'm very protective of Tamla. I want to make sure she does this right. All these things, And so, Jim gave me his bless. That's atypical. It's not typical. So my CEO getting involved in the board selection process, but it was important that I had his blessing, but I didn't need it that much, but he was engaged in the process. And so after all of that, and they really accommodated all of my questions, my desire to meet with them multiple times to make sure it was the right call for me, having my CEO's blessings, all those things worked out. And they've been very patient with me, learning the company and all those things. And I like them. They are a fun group. They're not, you can have some boards that are very egotistical and trying to jockey for the chairmanship and things like that. I haven't experienced any of that. They are very comfortable in their own skin and they value my contributions. And that is worth its weight in gold. And it has really been a great match and not, I have to study. Like I really do have to you prepare. It's not like a side job. It is a job. You have to really prepare for. So I think you also need to ask yourself, why are you interested? What is it going to do for you? And what are you hoping to gain from doing that? What is your why? Because it's not a hobby. It is a serious, opportunity that you have to have time and have the capacity to be able to do. So that was my story, looking for, am I going to leverage and learn? And then I wanted to make sure that the size of the group was, not so big so I could have a voice. And I've been very fortunate, thanks to Egon Zender for the match. And it's been a really good fit for me.
It's great advice. And Lisa Blaze, I want to bring you into this conversation because I'd love to hear, look, we have these two star pupils, right? They're very easy to match with boards, but how would you advise others to really position themselves and tell their story in a compelling way?
Sure. Yes. Both Lisa and Tom were poster children on how, especially Lisa, on how to get on a board. I wish I could have recorded that and played back on all these webinars. So it's really looking from within and understanding the value that you could bring to a board. Also, I would say, educate yourself around governance, right? You'd be surprised at how many candidates I speak with that don't even understand the 3 committees and the role of the nominating committee. So the more board exposure you have to your own board, regardless of what level you are in the organization, hopefully you can get exposure to your own board so that you understand the role of governance versus management. And then looking into your background and doing some homework, what is it that you think you could bring to a board? And what are you looking to learn, as Tamla said, right? Because it's going to be it needs to be mutually beneficial. And then testing that elevator pitch to your CEO or people in your network on whether they think that resonates to them, people who are experienced directors. And then it's really what Lisa said, it's network, and ask for people to network on your behalf, right? Your CEO specifically. We get calls or asks all the time from public company CEOs saying, listen, I need you to get Peter, Paul, Mary on a board, right? My CEO successors or people that are ready for boards. So you need your CEO, your board members even advocating on your behalf because they're very well networked, as you can imagine. So back to the elevator pitch and understanding your value. Again, based on your background, you should, and knowing what the trends are in business in general and what sectors, that should become quite clear what value you can add. And you should have an understanding of what sectors that value that or what sectors don't, or what company sizes or what situation the business is in. That's why you should have a criteria, which Tamla and Lisa had, which again is very unusual, to be honest. As I talk to board seekers, I'll say to them, listen, how should we be thinking about you and what you're looking for? And most candidates don't have that, right? So you need to think that through. What board makes sense for you? So it makes it easier for people like me and my colleagues to reach out to you. So you really want to make it easy for, our potential clients, people that are looking for board directors, as well as people like me. The easier you make it for us, the more successful you're going to be, right? To make it crisp. What are you looking for? What can you bring to a board, and therefore what sector size, ownership, is it public, private equity, family business? Those are the things that you should be thinking through.
Very, very helpful advice. Lisa Edwards, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about, over the course of the past several years, we've been seeing more diverse board members coming onto boards. We've, definitely there's women, people of color, different skill sets really being sought after by corporate boards. And so I want to ask you, as you were thinking about your board seat, how did you make sure that you weren't just going to be a statistic for them? How did you make sure this was going to be really something where they were going to be leveraging your skills and your unique perspective, and you weren't just checking a box for them?
Yeah, I frankly got over this a long time ago. I think there are so many qualified women and people of color out there. It's sort of like, for those of you who know Shelley Archambault, she's here in the Bay Area, Black woman CEO. I was having brunch with her a couple weekends ago, and she said, people who say there is a pipeline problem are looking up the wrong pipe. So I think there are myriad qualified people out there. Boards are a network, and like Tamla says, you got to pick them carefully because these are people that you are going to have a decade-long relationship with. And so I actually think that a lot of the time it is not malicious. It is just, we need a new guy. I know Bob. Bob's like he's a good guy. Like, let's grab Bob. And it's as we get more women, as we get more people of color on boards, like our networks start to have that network effect too. So I do think there's a natural transition to more equity on boards. That said, I would say that the reason I got myself over it is because the data is extremely clear. You can pull McKinsey studies on this. You can pull PwC studies on this. You can pull a dozen studies on this. And boards and leadership teams that are more diverse are more likely to generate long-term sustainable value and profitability. And so if someone says, oh, we got to find a woman, I don't really care if they're doing it because it is the right thing to do. And we should reflect our population, we should reflect our employee base, and we should reflect our customer base and our communities. Or if they're doing it because it's an obligation of the state of California and they are just not sort of clued in yet, or they are doing it because they want to be more profitable. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I would say in that second instance, that goes to know your board. Know that you're going to have a voice, that the seat on the table is going to be a true full seat. But the vetting process is such that they will select someone who is qualified. And so once you get the seat, I would say, kick the doubter off your shoulder and just say, I was selected. I have a reason to be here. I deserve to be here, and I'm going to be a participant. And so, I think it is, for me, the thing that gets me, I just dismiss it out of hand at this point, is that the data is very clear. It is the right thing to do for a company. It makes for better decision making. It makes for better governance. So, I'm over it.
That's great. Tamla, I want to ask you to reflect on the same question, but I'm also just eager to know, how is your board leveraging your incredible experience in HR? I mean, we're in this incredible time of human capital management challenges. And so have they made you the head of the NomGov committee yet? Have they asked you about that? So what was this experience like for you in making sure that you weren't going to just be a box checking exercise for them?
Well, I knew that they had talent and leadership challenges, and they as they transition to this elevated company, that they have to do so with different types of leaders and people, right? So, I mean, I knew that coming in, and they had just renamed their management development and compensation committee to human capital and compensation committee. So they even changed the name and immediately put me on that board, obviously. And so, and prior to the new CEO, they didn't even have a chief people officer or a head of HR. And her first appointment that she made was the head of HR. So that was another indication that the company needed human capital leadership, and they were looking for this expertise. And so not only am I helping kind of with the ELT, the executive leadership team process, but I'm also helping the new chief people officer assimilate to to Summit as well. And so I'm so sorry, my phone is ringing and I don't know how to get it off.
It's okay.
Sorry, I don't
It
know how to
happens
do that.
to all of us.
Oh my goodness. So I'm going to try to turn that off right quick. So I don't know.
If I could jump in while she's turning that off. I think the other thing is the skill set that's required. I feel like is increasingly diverse and female, candidly. So whether that is the pandemic has put a new light on human capital management, on the Great Resignation, on how do we recruit and maintain and build culture in our companies and make sure that we have butts in seats, as it were, to get the job done. That's a big deal, and it is top of mind for boards right now. So so that HR expertise is it has historically been more gender balanced as female. We are seeing more and more emphasis in the boardroom on technology and cyber. And while that's still a male dominated industry, there are a lot of women in that industry too. And you think about all of the, ransomware attacks, and that is a board level issue. How are we doing, how are we managing our cybersecurity is a big deal. And we're seeing that come into the boardroom. So you see all these different things coming in and say, there is always going to be a role for a former CEO on a board. It just is a fact that it is a good sounding board and an ally, and to have someone that has walked in your shoes in the same lonely job as a CEO is very important on a board.
Yeah.
But there's a role for other things as well.
I agree. And I would say, I think COVID has really underscored the importance of understanding the future of work and human capital needs. And if you don't understand it, it could totally disrupt and destroy a company. So I think people are being even more intentional about really understanding all the things that Lisa talked about at first in terms of, racial equity, the future of work, the infusion of technology in terms of how work gets done. All of those things you probably never had to think through. And then you have these enormous labor challenges that no one really anticipated them to be as enormous as they are. How are we going to solve for that? Because if we don't solve for that, that could destroy our business. And so I think there has been a heightened sense of awareness and appreciation for the role that a chief people officer can bring, like a true practitioner, not someone who says that they understand people, someone who really understands the practice and the profession and lending that expertise to the organization, because it's become, increasingly more valuable as we look to kind of the future of work and how companies are going to respond to that. So it's been great for CHROs joining boards because they're adding value immediately. Yeah.
Well, we have some good questions coming in from the audience now. And so, Lisa Blaze,
Okay.
I think I want to direct this first one to you. Leslie has posted a question here. And Leslie, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and just ask, but the question was around the vetting and interview process with board appointments and what recommendations we have for standing out from other candidates, and particularly in a virtual and electronic environment, which I think adds an extra layer of complexity. So any advice that you have to share there?
Yeah, I would say two things, or three. One would be, again, just somehow demonstrate your knowledge of just governance in general. Second thing would be to communicate with clarity around what you can bring to a board. So clearly invest the time and energy in advance to understand that, and to be clear on that. And related to that is really what are you targeting? What types of industries, companies would value that expertise? And then lastly, I would say, and this is a complaint. This is the complaint that I get most often from current clients, CEOs. I mean, just actually last week, I've had two CEOs complain about this to me. And it's not about women or folks from underrepresented groups only. Obviously, white men can suffer from this as well. But just anecdotally, or my sample size or my data set, it's more women than men that suffer from this. Is you need to be able to demonstrate in an interview with people like myself, and then ultimately our clients, that you can elevate, and that you're not going to be in the weeds. These two CEOs in the past week have talked to me about a couple board members that they're frustrated with that just can't seem to learn the difference between management and governance. And as Tamla said, it's hard. It's not easy. It sounds like, of course I know the difference. Intellectually, you're going to know the difference. But behaviorally, it's going to be difficult. And so in an interview, staying at the right level and really not getting into the weeds on how you did things and so forth, staying at the strategic level, here's what I did, here's a couple ways how I did it, but not going down a rabbit hole. You'd be surprised at how many people just think it's an executive search and they're interviewing for an executive role and they're in the weeds. And so it leaves me feeling with, and my clients are feeling with, listen, they're going to drag us into the weeds. And the last thing a CEO wants is to add someone to the board who thinks that they're running the company, or that, you know, the CEO reports to them. So that's the biggest complaint I get, both during a process and then once someone joins a board, learning how to do that. So anyway, those are some tips and tricks I would say to really stand out and do well, because many candidates don't do that.
Yeah, if I could just chip in there, there's a lot of online resources. So as Lisa says, it is not a job interview, it is a board interview, and it's different. So do get yourself educated on governance. The Diligent Institute, the Dottie heads up, has a bunch of free information. So you can hit that. You can kind of learn about sort of trends in the boardroom, what's going on. You know, there's different ways to stay up to speed there. And I agree with Lisa. Ultimately, the role of the board is to hire and fire the CEO, and to, you know, to support and make them successful right up until you have to either hire a new one or whatever. So, you know, it's a different role that takes some getting used to.
I would also say I'm a member of this group called Black Women on Boards, and we help to prepare the women so you can ask questions in a safe space, like, you know, the things you wish you had known and never known, and, you know, and how to prepare your board bio. And, you know, you have people that are tenured board members, you have people that are new board members, and we have workshops that's very transparent. We kind of tell you everything, you know, everything you need to know through experience. So, you know, joining networking. So I think Lisa talked about the power of networking is really critical, not just to be placed on the board, but to also prepare for boards. You need to understand. Until you're in it, you don't know. You know, so you need to ask questions in terms of the, you know, how and what, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I really would encourage you to really to search your why. Why are you interested in being on a board? And when should you do it? Because like I said, I mean, I'm learning as I go. I'm very good. I'm a very good CPO, Chief People Officer. I'm learning how to be a very good board member, and I'm not there yet. And that's okay, because that's new to me. It's hard. It's hard switching from operator to governance, like really, really, really hard when you just want to get in there and tell them what they need to do because you've seen the movie before, but that's not your role. And so I don't want you to underestimate how hard that is, but you have to, again, examine your why, work to answer your questions in advance, practice, practice your interviewing, ask all the questions. I mean, just, you have to prepare for this. It is another job, but it's a different type of job. It's a really different type of job. And it's not like a pastime. You know, I have to study a lot too. I have to study the business because it's an aggregates business. It's not an environmental services business. And so when you are helping them make decisions for the future of the company and it has shareholder implications, you can't be just willy-nilly. You know, it's a big responsibility. And you need to make sure that you are truly vested in your why and get the resources and help and support you need in order to make the best decision for you. I would encourage you to do that.
I want to pick up on a thread of something that you just said, Tamla, because Black Women on Boards is such a great organization. And I do think those sessions are so dynamic. And someone just asked a great question. Christine just asked, hey, any tips for getting the most out of forums like this one? So we have this great group of people. How can you make the most out of this and really network with the other people who are here in this Zoom format? It can sometimes be a little awkward to network in a Zoom format because only one person can speak at a time. So any hot tips for the audience? And I'll give that to anyone who wants to take it.
I mean, I would say for us, I do a lot of these. And so I would just say, welcome to receive resumes. Now, I can't promise that I'm going to respond to you individually because between that and LinkedIn requests, as you can imagine, we get many of them. But I'd be happy to put them in our database, in our board seeker list, and flag. Also, it's also important. It sounds silly, but if you are from an underrepresented minority group, please self-identify that just from a legal perspective and in our database. And so we set the right flags in our system. But that's one way to network, is feel free to send me your board bios and your CVs, and I can put them into our database. That's one thing that we do on these Zoom formats.
Yeah. The one thing I would say as well, Lisa, to that point, I think if you reach out via LinkedIn, I get a lot of requests as well. Put the heading, like where we connected, and be specific about your need. Like if you have a question about something, ask the question so that I can give you the answer versus making it generic. I think you just have to be very specific about what you need. And I haven't had anyone, on LinkedIn or in my network or people that I don't know say no to a question that I've asked because they would have fulfilled my need, right? So if you have a question for me saying, where do I go to get X? Then that's a simple answer. I can give you, I may not be able to call you like Lisa said, or connect and have a 30-minute conversation because I don't have the capacity to have 30-minute conversations with everyone. But I do respond to LinkedIn messages and help direct you to where you need to go. And so that's what I would recommend as well. Be specific about your ask, and hopefully you'll get your ask answered in a quicker way.
And by the way, I see numbers of us are posting our LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So if you feel comfortable doing that and want to do that, please do. And we'll try to capture all of those and maybe send those out to everybody as a follow-up after today's session. So if you want to share contact information, please feel free to do that, and we can connect everyone to each other, because I think that's a great way for us to all network.
Well, speaking of self-identifying, Dottie, I think it's great that your LinkedIn is Gov Tech Geek.
Yes. Might as well just tell people who I am right out of the gate.
Yeah,
exactly right. Well, listen, I think it'd also be interesting to talk a little bit about onboarding, because I think with certainly there's so many efforts around bringing on new diverse talent to boards. And finding new diverse talent for boards is one part of the process, but maybe an even more important part of the process is how to onboard everybody so that they can work really well together and really benefit from diverse perspectives. And I think sometimes that second piece is harder for boards to accomplish than even the first. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about some good onboarding strategies. Maybe share a little bit about what your onboarding process was like, what you felt worked well, and any thoughts that you have for the onboarding just generally. I don't know who wants to take that one first, but maybe Lisa, you look like you're ready to speak, so I'll give it to you first, and then I'd love to hear from Tamla as well.
Yeah, I suspect it's similar, but not the same in many companies. So for me, it was, I had meetings with many of the business leaders in the org, whether that was the head of marketing, the head of HR, the head of technology, the head of R&D, and they took me through their orgs, and they took me, the head of Europe. So they took me through, like, here's the scope of what we do, and here's how it works. And honestly, I had some feedback for the team after that, because I got it all sort of in a 3-week period. And it was sort of like learn our company from, the mailroom to the boardroom in 3 weeks. And you all have been here for 20 years, right? So it was like a lot of data. So, I said, look, the next person that comes in, you need to get them the materials 3 days in advance. You need to give them a chance to read it so that they can, and then they're not just absorbing real time. The other thing that I did not get, that I said, this is a miss, you all have been together too long, because I was the first new board member in a while, but now there's been 2 more in the 3 years since I joined. They didn't give me a mentor, and I kind of found one. So I sort of, locked arms early on with someone else on the board, and sort of asked all the dumb questions, literally said, like, this is my first board. I will have some dumb questions. May I ask them of you? And please, can we keep it between ourselves? And so, I think, like, if you are not assigned a board mentor, asking for a board mentor to have those things, I think, is important. And then I think just, I actually think the women are great at this. The women read the dang books. Like, I go through that thing. I go through it 3 times. I go through it for like 5 hours the Sunday before. I go through it like 2 days before, and I go through it the night before. And it's a lot of work, but I think that's that's the way that I like to do things. And so I think do the hard work on, being prepared in the meetings, goes a long way. And it also is, as onboarding, there's just extra. So you sort of have to set aside extra time to do that extra work. So I think those are some of the things. And then maybe I'll just in the spirit of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The other thing that I saw in the chat was, how do you think about ongoing education? So I think, there's lots of places to educate yourself. online. I gave you the Diligent Institute. I'm personally taking an ESG class right now at Berkeley because ESG is going to be a big deal on boards. And it is number one on Chairman Gensler's list of regulatory priorities. In terms of both climate change and human capital management. So we can expect to see regulation coming. I want to be prepared as a board member to be able to speak to that knowledgeably. So I'm in my, ample spare time. I'm doing an online class in ESG. So, there's lots of different ways to do it. If you have a passion for something and it is a relevant governance topic, that's another way to think about doing some of that.
So Tamla, what are your thoughts about onboarding? And after you went through it, did you teach them how to do it right?
So the onboarding was pretty good for me because I got the opportunity to speak with every board member, every chair. Also, there's a pretty large operation here in Houston. So I got to visit that as well and kind of see how things got done. And then the other benefit for me, as I said before, one of the board members who happened to be, she chairs the NomGov committee, came from GE, and she worked for GE for 26 years. I was with GE for 20 years. So we had a natural affinity. So she became my mentor, and she's been very helpful. I can call her for anything, ask her any question, all those things. And I would say the other thing, if you are new to a board, you don't have to start, you don't know the company. So you don't have to start offering insights. Like if you do, they may look at you like, what do you know? So for me, it's been really hard to be silent about some things because that's not my nature, but it's been something that's been the best gift for me to not have to know everything. And I know the human capital space, and I really offer insights that are valuable in that space. But a lot of other things I'm learning. And so take the time to learn. That's a part of the orientation that you need to govern yourself with. You don't have to go in and immediately have an opinion about something. And I think if you have an opinion too fast, then that could be also detrimental because you don't know enough to know. So, but the orientation has been good. The things that I've offered as insights and for them to make it better, they've operationalized. So I've been very fortunate to have had a great orientation, and I'm still learning. And the fact
I
of the
agree. Oops,
but
sorry. I was going to say, I agree with your zip it the first meeting. Listen, learn, understand the dynamics of the room, understand like who's contributing, who's not. There's no participation bonus. So especially that first meeting, like you don't want to be a deaf mute for perpetuity. So you do want to make sure that you can contribute. But I do think it's important to. Nobody wants a know-it-all on day one.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's been I'm sorry, Lisa. The other thing that's been helpful for me, because the company's strategy has changed and it's evolving as well. So even though the board members have been there for a long time, a lot of things that they're going through in this new evolution of the strategy is also new, right? So you have a historical context and perspective, but sometimes that could be a detriment because we have a new leader looking at things differently. So I'm sorry, Lisa.
The only comments I would say would be on onboarding would be, well, two things. One, don't be rushed. Again, I do hear that feedback that people are too anxious to add value.
That's right.
Be confident in the fact that you were selected. So they're confident you're going to add value at some point. And then secondly is ask for feedback early and often to your board buddy. If you don't have a board buddy or mentor or whatever, make sure you get one. And then just constantly ask for feedback after every meeting, after every committee meeting. That's the way you're going to learn.
Great. Well, we're going to now play our lightning round because we're into our final 2 minutes. So I'm going to start with Lisa Blaze, if that's okay. And Lisa, take 45 seconds. Any best and final advice for this audience today?
Oh boy, I wasn't prepared for this. Let's see. Network. And then again, be clear around the value you can bring to a board and get yourself educated. Just being in a corporate setting doesn't educate you about governance. Now I know Diligence great, has great resources. NACD is one they also recommend. There's great online classes, they all have regional chapters around the country. You can go to events. So get in the flow of board members there, and you can educate yourself and network at the same time. And that's what I would say. And then be patient. Be patient.
Great. Tamala, how about you? 45 seconds, best and final advice for the audience.
So I'm going to use this. This is what we use with Black women on board. So I would say prepare to be placed. Once you are placed, prepare to be propelled. So you have to, preparation is key. Preparation is key for your placement. And once you are placed on the board, you have to continue to prepare so that you can offer insights to the board so that you can be advanced on the board. So prepare, be placed, and propel.
Love it. Lisa, final 45 seconds, best and final.
Wow, I get to close. I think it's really a plus one of both what Tamala and Lisa said. It is really, network, express what you want, and then manifest your destiny, and do give yourself adequate time. So as an example, when I sort of got to the place where I felt like I could add value to a board and I was senior enough and I had enough under my belt and I had the bandwidth to contribute to it, I gave myself 3 years. And I said, it could take 3 years. It might take 5. And that's okay to find the right thing for you. I would just do one final thing. I talked to a lot of women about getting their first board, and I will give you the wrong answer when someone says, why do you want to be on the board? And the wrong answer is, it's my retirement plan. So, it is a good retirement plan. That is the wrong answer.
Yeah, don't tell anybody that but your network.
Okay.
Well, I hope you all will join me in giving a virtual round of applause to our 3 incredible panelists today: Lisa Blaze, Lisa Edwards, and Tamala Oates-Forney. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
And our moderator, thank you.
Really great.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Donnie. Well done.
All. Great. Well, thank
Thank
you all so
everyone.
much.
Bye-bye. Take care,
Follow up,
everyone.
and
Bye-bye.
have a great afternoon.